I went to my sister's wedding to be the maid of honor and left as the woman who had been forced to marry her groom. I thought my life was over. Then I discovered the man I had been traded for was hiding a fortune, a past, and a promise that would change everything I believed about family, duty, and love. People talk about marriage like it's a single step, a nervous walk down an aisle, a kiss, a name change. They never tell you about the weight that sometimes rides on that step. Debts, bargains whispered in kitchens, the old ledger of favors that flourishes in families like mold. In my family, favors had a way of becoming deadlines. Before we dive deeper into this emotional roller coaster of love, betrayal, and destiny, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city, name in the comments below so we can give your location a special shout out in our next story. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell because more jaw-dropping love twists, heartbreaking secrets, and powerful redemption stories are coming your way every week. My name is Ada. I was 27 when my sister, Ijeoma, was supposed to marry Chinedu. We had grown up on the same street in Enugu, shoes scuffed in the same mud, secrets shared under the mango tree. She was the one with easy laughter. I was the steady one, the one who could be trusted to hold things together. When our father's business collapsed and our mother fell ill, the house shrank and the ledger grew. That's how bargaining begins, not with a villain's laugh, but with the quiet, practical math of survival. The bargain that changed my life started with a single line in a text, message from our uncle, emergency, family meeting. Bring yourselves. That night, with the house humming with the worry of people who had stopped pretending everything was fine, a solution was proposed. It was slower and colder than a knife. Ijeoma's intention had been revealed to have a secret condition, an enemy who sought to sabotage the match unless certain guarantees were made. The most expedient guarantee, my uncle said, was this. Ada would marry Chinedu in her sister's place, sign the papers, attend the rites, and afterward the court would acknowledge the union. In return, the family would receive one thing we desperately needed, an immediate investment that would clear our debts and pay for our mother's treatment. It's temporary, Ijeoma told me that night, her voice breaking into flint. Just until the judge approves the annulment. I'll come back. You'll come back. Her eyes were wet and fierce. I thought then it was a plan executed by scared people. I thought it could work. It did not. We rehearsed smiles for the wedding. Ijeoma practiced the vows in the bathroom mirror. I learned how to fold my hands convincingly. Chinedu, dark, tall, impeccable in a suit that made him look like a man with no past, smiled politely and called me Ada with a curious gentleness. The guests applauded as if they were watching a play performed by actors who had never once missed a cue. Cameras kept rolling. My mother, white-faced and resolute, tightened her grip on my hand like an anchor. That night, I walked down the aisle and tried to count the steps to steady myself. The priest's voice was a distant drum. I remember the weight of the ring, the warmth of Chinedu's palm when we held hands, and the hollow that swallowed the space between I do and everything that came after. People told me later that I had married for my family and not for myself. They said it like it was praise. I felt nothing but the cold, slow slide of every comfort and dream I had tucked away. It was unstitched one seam at a time. After the ceremony, when the music faded and the lights dimmed, I stood in a room full of people who celebrated a union they believed in. I felt like an imposter in a costume that would suffocate me. The first sign that nothing was as simple as it looked came a week after the wedding. Our uncle handed me an envelope exactly like the ones used for bank notices. Inside were documents, contracts, legal guardianships, and a wire transfer confirmation for an amount that made the numbers on our debt. Letters looked like child scribbles. The funds had cleared into an account in our mother's name. How? I started. Uncle didn't meet my eyes. The family invested before the wedding. It's done. That evening, when the house had simmered down and the lights went low, Chinedu and I sat in the sitting room, two strangers holding a quiet, awkward truce. He had been careful to treat me with the same politeness he offered everyone, never condescending, never warm. Then, for the first time, he slid a small black card across the coffee table. Open it, he said. On the card, embossed and discreet, was a logo I would later learn belonged to an investment group with holdings across 3 continents. His voice when he spoke of it was matter of fact. I run several businesses, he said. Most of the work is behind doors you wouldn't expect. I didn't want my name in the papers. That's why I asked for discretion. He looked at me like he revealed nothing and everything at once. I tried to let it lodge somewhere sensible in my head. Billionaire, investor, hidden life. Each title was like an onion peel, one back and another layer made your eyes sting. He said he had kept his wealth private to protect the people he loved. I wanted to ask him who he loved. I wanted to ask whether I was part of a calculation or a shield. I did not. Life with Chinedu was a study in contrasts. We shared a roof, but not a life. He traveled often, not for leisure, but because there were factories to open. Meetings with suppliers, negotiations in cities I had not yet visited. When he was home, he was present the way a careful guest is. Attentive, but reserved. He began to show me fragments of a life I had not imagined. Charities he supported. A scholarship program at a university he'd quietly funded in Joe's. An archive of letters from men and women whose lives his money had improved. He was not the vast villainous caricature I had expected. He was pragmatic and strangely patient. The kind of man whose power was exercised in small, surgical motions rather than loud displays. There was tenderness, a painstaking, bewildering tenderness in the way he tucked a blanket around my mother when she napped, in the way he called Ijeoma with updates that preserved her dignity, in the way he made sure our bills were paid without fanfare. But tenderness did not erase the fact of my being traded. It did not answer why. When I asked him about the annulment that would restore my sister to the man she loved, he hesitated. The law is slow, he told me, and an annulment requires motive. If the court suspects coercion, it could complicate everything. He made it sound like a legal puzzle. I heard it as a sentence. There is a peculiar violence in the way we begin to love people we did not choose. At first, my feelings for Chinedu were landmines. Resentment, fear, the bitter aftertaste of sacrifice. Then one afternoon in the market, he handed me a mango I had been eyeing. The fruit too small for him to notice, too perfect for me to refuse. The gesture was trivial and intimate. I found myself laughing in a way that surprised me. We began to talk about small, dangerous things, favorite books, the music we loved as children, the way the rain smelled in each person's hometown. I told him about the nights I had stayed up with my mother, listening to the whir of the oxygen machine. He told me about nights at a trading floor where he watched markets rise and fall like rhythms he could not tame. Those conversations were stitches. Each one sewed me closer to him. It was not love at once. It was an accumulation. Affection sits quietly in the corners of your life and waits for permission to bloom. Once it had a foothold, it grew fast. He began to show me parts of himself he reserved even from his staff. A well-worn copy of Achebe on his nightstand, a photograph of a child with a crooked smile, a nephew tucked into a drawer, a vial of lavender oil he used before meetings. But even as I learned the shape of him, secrets lodged like splinters under my skin. Ijeoma's absence painted a space in our house. She called less, her voice a brittle thread we both tried not to break. Sometimes she would cry and tell me she had made the wrong choice. Other times she would say, in a whisper that sounded like a plea, that she wanted this for our family's future. The ledger of favors had been paid in full, but the account's emotional interest kept accruing. Everything changed on a Tuesday in June. Our housekeeper in Chem, a woman whose loyalty was carved from the same dirt as our childhoods, came to me with an envelope trembling in her hand. Inside were emails and copies of correspondence between Chinedu and an unknown number of businessmen. The subject lines were innocuous, yet the messages hinted at something else. A trust fund, a transfer, a contingency plan that named me as a beneficiary in an event none of us had been told about. I forced myself to read. The emails were not just about money. They contained a clause that made me the legal guardian of a foundation Chinedu had set up in our mother's name. The documents were stamped with the signature of a law firm I recognized from the city. In one line, buried like a seed, was the reason for his secrecy: security concerns for family members who might be targeted should his involvement be public. I confronted him that night. He did not deny it. Instead, he sat opposite me in the kitchen and explained in a voice moderated by patience that made rage feel small. There was a rival, a former partner who had wanted control of a project that would have disturbed innocent lives. Exposing himself publicly, he argued, would have made our family a target. He needed a quiet marriage to protect us while he resolved the threat. What about Ijeoma? I asked. He looked at his hands. I promised her I would protect the union that was meant for her. This was the only way I could see to do it. You read things like that, and your chest compresses, with anger and gratitude and a weird kind of shame. Was I the savior he wanted? The shield? Or the person he had chosen to silence the scandal? The answers were messy and not without consequence. Shortly after that revelation, a man arrived at our house with an envelope and a lawyer's air. He claimed to represent the former partner. On his tongue was a rumor explosive and cruel. that Chinedu had orchestrated the entire wedding for personal gain and had used Ijeoma and me as pawns. The story spread through town like wildfire. The press smelled blood, and friends who had once smiled at our success now shifted, uncomfortably when they saw us. Ijeoma fled, not to another home, but to the other side of the continent, where she could disappear into a life she had wanted but never dared to claim. She sent messages that were brief and fractured apologies, explanations, anger, gratitude all braided together. Each one landed in my hands like a letter from a stranger. The betrayal stung from every direction. I felt used. I felt complicit. But worse, I felt used by the person I was beginning to love. I wanted to smash the plates in our kitchen, to tear the silk curtains down, to give voice to an outrage that had nowhere soft to land. Instead, I went to the office, where the foundation was registered, and confronted the cold-eyed accountant who ran it. He handed me a ledger and said flatly, "Those funds are for education, for clinics, for people who would otherwise die. The smallest of your family is less important than the many." Looked at me like I might still be persuaded by moral calculus. I left with my hands empty of comfort. In the weeks that followed, there was a choice to be made. I could take the money, sign the annulment, reclaim my sister's promised life, and walk away with bone-deep resentment that would hollow me. Or I could stay, figure out who I was in a house whose foundations had been paid for with one of the largest favors my family would ever receive, and try to make sense of a man who had done both harm and good. I chose a third path, one that belonged to no map. I did not immediately forgive Chinedu. Forgiveness, I realized, is not a single act, but a path you walk toward or away from. I remained in the marriage, because my mother's health needed the medicine and because there were children at the clinics whose lives were literally being purchased by the funds that had saved our home. Choosing to stay meant learning to separate motives from outcomes. It meant seeing that good could sprout from choices made for the wrong reasons. It meant watching Chinedu at 2 in the morning, sign papers that would open a free clinic in a neighborhood where the nearest hospital was 30 kilometers away. It meant listening to him speak to a young employee with the kind of encouragement my father used to give me when I studied late into the night. Love, when it finally came, was not the thing you read about in novels. It was uneven. It arrived after small kindnesses and long arguments, after storms and reconciliations. It arrived when he brought me back the very mango I had wanted weeks before, when he stood in the rain to hold an umbrella over my mother's head, when he called Ijeoma with news of a scholarship in her name. My heart did not surrender all at once. It was cautious, bruised in places I did not expect. But the man who had entered my life as an anonymous solution became someone whose arms were my refuge. He asked nothing in return for his tenderness, and yet asked everything the truth of me. The honesty I had withheld in the beginning to protect myself. I gave it slowly, my fears, my hatred, my moments of joy. He held them, not like trophies, but like fragile things that needed tending. The true twist came not from riches or from betrayal, but from a revelation that reframed everything. Ijeoma returned home 2 years later, not with accusations and not with anger, but with a child. A little boy whose eyes were like hers and whose laughter sounded like the future. She had found love in a place where she could be herself, had carved out a life that made her glow in a way I had never seen. She nodded. I asked because I thought I could. Make our family safe by giving you the opportunity I was afraid to take. I thought I could have both the man I loved and the safety of our mother by stepping back. I was wrong in thinking I had the right to decide that for you. Her confession toppled me. It revealed a woman who had loved fiercely and badly, who had tried to solve an impossible equation with courage and selfishness braided together. Her apology was not theatrical. It was an offering made of bone and blood. I forgave her, but not without cost. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It rearranges it. The final twist, the quietest, most intimate of them, was the way Chinedu looked at me across the breakfast table the morning after Ijeoma's confession. It was the look of a man who had loved me through the scandal. The silence, the arrangement. It was a look that said he had never been coerced into anything but had chosen, repeatedly, to protect people who mattered. He had been a billionaire, yes, but he was also the man who made our mother laugh again. He had been the stranger who, by degrees, became my home. Years later, when our mother's laugh returned in full, when the clinic had sent its first ambulances into the fields for deliveries, and when our family ledger had been balanced not just in money, but in truth, we sat in the shade of the mango tree again. Ijeoma's boy chased butterflies. Chinedu and I held hands the way people who had been through storms do, with familiarity and gratitude. Our love was not the stuff of movies. It was steadier. complicated by choice, tempered by sacrifice. We never forgot the debt we had paid to protect a family, nor did we forget the strange path that had made us who we were. The marriage that began as a bargain became, imperfectly and gloriously, our chosen life. The billionaire in plain clothes remained generous with his secrecy, but no longer withholds himself from me. He shares the burdens now and takes joy in small things. A mango from the market, a joke shared at the end of a long day, a tender letter tucked beneath a coffee mug. And sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the oxygen machine hums in the corner like a lullaby, we remember how precarious happiness can be, how it is often built from the rubble of sacrifices and the slow forgiveness of human hearts. We remember and we build anyway, because that is what families do. They survive the bargains, they forgive the missteps, and occasionally, when the math is finally right, they love. And that was the unbelievable story of I was forced to marry my sister's groom, but he turned out to be a billionaire. Life doesn't always hand us choices. Sometimes it forces us into corners where love, pain, and destiny collide. But even from the darkest corners, light finds a way in. What would you have done if you were in Ada's shoes? Would you walk away from a forced marriage, or stay to uncover the truth behind it all? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're reading every single one. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind. And remember, sometimes the hardest journeys lead us to the most beautiful endings.